So today we're gonna take a look at 10 of the best feats you can get in Baldur's Gate. There are 3 you can grab on each class by level 12, and while I will focus on some of the best I've found, keep in mind there are plenty niche options that can fit specific roles a bit better. So that's something we'll talk about in a case-by-case basis when going over builds. In the meantime, we will talk about them in a more general sense. Also, keep in mind that if you plan on multi-classing, this doesn't mean you get extra feats, as they are still dependent on the levels invested in each class. So if you go 3 points into one class and 1 point into another, you're not gonna get the feat that you normally get at level 4. You will need 4 levels at least in one of them. Starting with the ability improvement, as basic as it seems, it's one of the best to get and one of the first I recommend on pretty much any build. This gives you 2 extra points to allocate in any of the stats, up to a maximum of 20 for each one of them. It's usually one of the best and most straightforward ways to improve your class, as it lets you directly buff your primary ability. So your main goal, especially as a damage dealer, is to reach 20 with your primary ability. This will ensure higher damage, more success on attack rolls, as well as on ability checks. So you can get 17, which is the max to get by default, then +2 from ability improvement brings it to 19, and then you can get a 1 extra point in any of the abilities by simply letting On the Ethel live in the Hag mission early on, so you can reach 20 in the starting hours. This immediately puts you at an absolutely massive advantage. The next one is the Great Weapon Master, another god tier perk to have. So when you land a critical hit or defeat a target with a melee weapon attack, you can make another attack as a bonus action that very turn. On top of this, attacks with heavy melee weapons that you are proficient with, such as great swords or warhammers, can deal an extra 10 damage at the cost of -5 attack roll penalty. This doesn't seem to have a cooldown on it, and it can literally trigger on any critical hit, even multiple ones if you can pull them off successfully in the same turn. And there were moments I pulled off 3 critical hits in one single row against the same enemy, which all provided 1 extra melee attack bonus, so 3 in total on top of the 3 I already dealt. That is absolutely crazy. So this just works very well on paladins, fighters, barbarians, especially barbarians with frenzy or reckless attacks. And that -5 attack roll can be mitigated with a ton of buffs from the bard or the cleric classes. The next one is the Savage Attacker, another top tier option that also synergizes very well with the previous perk. So this is going to make your weapon attacks to roll your damage dice twice, and it will use the higher value. Like in this example, we see our initial roll was only 1, but then the Savage Attacker reroll kicked in and it was now a 6 instead. This doesn't have any cooldown and works on each hit per turn. So for example, if you have dual wield on, this means it can trigger on both of the main as well as the offhand melee attacks. It goes without saying that this will only work on melee attacks and not ranged ones, as it's obviously shown by the tooltip. So a really great option if you want to beat the odds and increase your damage even more in case you struggle with that. But even if you don't, this just gives you much higher numbers. At number 4, we have the Lucky perk, which is another way to beat the odds and reroll the dice in your favor. So you gain 3 luck points with this, which can be used to gain an advantage on attack rolls, ability checks, saving throws, and even to make enemies reroll their own attacks against you. So say you want to attack an enemy, you can spend one of these lucky points and gain an advantage, which is going to increase your chance to hit them. But this also works on reactions. So if an enemy hits you, you can reroll that lucky point and maybe have a chance for them to miss instead. It's not, of course, guaranteed. You just get an advantage of these rolls, as in an advantage for them to go in your favor. But there are only 3 lucky points that you can spend in a long rest, which means once the 3 lucky points are consumed, you will have to take a long rest to reset them and use them again. But since you can trigger a long rest very often and with almost no restriction, you can pretty much have an uptime on this almost all the time. But let's move over to the more spellcaster friendly feats, and this is especially useful if you go with a sorcerer, a wizard, or even a warlock. One of them is the Elemental Adept. This makes your spells to ignore resistances to a damage type of your choice, and they cannot roll a 1. The option here includes acid, cold, fire, lightning, and thunder damage. Now the resistance ignore here is extremely good, as plenty of enemies have resistances of some type and sometimes even multiple types of resistances, and you will instead deal normal damage against them as a result. So if you really like a certain type of damage, for example fire from the fireball and the firewall, you can just invest in this and focus on that type of damage more. Ensure you don't roll a 1 on it ever, and also nullify all the enemies' resistances. Now, another option that would be very strong in theory is the Spell Sniper. However, I believe that this is bugged at the moment and it does not provide the critical hit bonus. So this lets you learn one cantrip from a number of cantrips like Bone Chill, Eldritch Blast, Firebolt, Ray of Frost, Shocking Blast, and Thorn Whip. And the number you need to roll a critical hit is reduced by 1, and this effect can stack. So this means you can land a critical hit 1 in 10 hits instead of 1 in 20. However, I might be wrong on that one. What's clear right now is that this is bugged and it doesn't trigger on that critical hit. So no matter what happens, if you use these cantrips, it will not trigger a critical hit, nor on any other type of spell that you use. Normally it should on all of them, but it doesn't seem to work. Once it does get fixed, I imagine that many classes and damage dealing spell builds will make use of it. However, virtually all Magic Initiate variants are solid options to pick, as they provide extra access to spells you might not get from your current class, though be mindful of the spellcasting ability that they use. So if it's a Bard, Sorcerer, or Warlock variant, they all use Charisma. If it's Cleric or Druid, they use Wisdom. And if it's the Wizard Initiate, then it's going to be Intelligence. However, you can make some really nice combinations. Maybe go with a Monk that uses this buff from the Druid to buff his attacks with the staff. Definitely works since both classes use Wisdom. Or one of the most popular is the Magic Initiate Warlock, since there are a number of strong options there. For early on, you have Eldritch Blast, which is a great cantrip. It also deals force damage. You also have access to Hex, and also that Rebuke that deals damage to enemies as a reaction. Totally solid options to pick early on. Now, moving on to number 6, let's talk about the non-spellcasting ranged characters. We have Crossbow Expert, we have Sharpshooter. They work very well here. Crossbow attacks within melee range no longer have a disadvantage to attack rolls when you have the Crossbow Expert. Plus, your piercing shot also inflicts gaping wounds for twice as long, so 4 turns of that enemy getting extra damage done onto them. The major point here is the removal of the disadvantage when enemies are close to you, which means you no longer get affected by the threatened debuff. You won't always get to control the battlefield, and many times enemies do get close to you, so this helps a ton with that. A rogue, a ranger, a dex fighter spec'd into ranged weapons can benefit very well from these. Also, Sharpshooter, this makes ranged weapon attacks to not receive penalties from high ground rules. So for example, you won't get disadvantage if you shoot enemies that are on a higher ground than you. Also, ranged weapons you're proficient with deal plus 10 damage, but have a minus 5 penalty to their attack rolls. So this is literally the ranged variant of the Great Weapon Master, except it doesn't have the bonus attack on crit action from that one. Meaning you can leave the passive on, gain a higher damage bonus, but at the cost of having your chance to hit the enemy slightly reduced. Since we have ample ways to mitigate that via various increases with the buffs, Precision Strike, if you go with a fighter for example, and many more from the Cleric and the Bard, you can more than make up for that. Now at number 7, we might have a sleeper hit, or at least in my opinion, I think that this is a bit better than what it seems at a first glance, and it's called the Dual Wielder. So you can equip 2 weapons in each hand, weapons that aren't light, and you also gain a plus AC while wielding a melee weapon in each hand. But this will not work with heavy weapons, so no, you cannot dual equip 2 great swords or 2 great hammers. But otherwise, it will work with literally everything else. So spears, tridents, pikes, non-light, long swords, they can be dual equipped now. And given how certain legendary options or even purple options have really good powerful effects on them, since you gain a dual wield with these weapons, you can use both the primary weapon to attack normally and the second one as a bonus action, so you get the benefits from them. And if you can get a weapon that is very strong, this can actually be a potential game changer. At number 8, it's time we talk a bit more about utility and mobility. One of them is obviously mobile, another solid option that increases your movement speed by 3 meters. Difficult terrain doesn't slow you down when you dash, and moving after a melee attack does not provoke an opportunity attack from nearby targets. This is actually huge, especially on the last one. It's a great feat for a monk, for example, but also rogue or a ranger, which already move really far if you go with the wood elf or half elf option that also extends your range in each turn. It almost doubles your movement speed if you go with that setup. But this is going to give you some major advantages. It means that you can just attack an enemy and no longer have to waste an action on a disengage or a runaway. You can just attack and then move however you see fit without triggering any opportunity attacks. Between all of these effects, you basically have insane control over the battlefield before the enemy even has a chance to move close to you. Otherwise, we also have Athlete. It gives a +1 to strength or dexterity if you want stats instead, which again, stats are some of the best to have. Standing up when you're prone uses significantly less movement, in this case only 1.5 meters, and you gain a +50% jump distance. So overall, a really great way, both if you want a gap closing ability or a way to disengage and just jump much further away. Plus, your penalty from lifting up your character from prone is only 1.5 meters instead of half of your entire movement speed. So if you were with a class that has 9.5 basic movement speed, that would have been 4 just to get up. Well, with this, it's only 1.5, so less than a quarter. Now, obviously, we can't talk about damage and utility without also referring to defenses. Tough is one of them, not a bad option actually for pretty much almost any class that wants a bit more survivability. It gives you 2 extra hit points for every level you gain, so 24 by level 12. And this is going to mean a 3rd extra HP for the more squishy classes like sorcerers or wizards, maybe not so much on barbarians. But we also have Sentinel, which I would say is also a god tier ability when you want to kind of punish enemies that attack your allies. So when an enemy in melee range attacks one of your allies, you can use one of your reactions to attack that enemy. You gain advantage on opportunity attacks, and hitting a creature with that, it completely prevents it from moving during that turn. So overall, a really good option again on a melee frontliner like a paladin, a barbarian, or a fighter that also wants to be a team player and help his mates out. You can use that opportunity attack to basically punish your enemy for their transgression, and not only that, they also can't run away from you, so the next time your turn comes, you just have a target in your face that you can immediately just destroy. Obviously, there are plenty more options in there, including ones that can extend the proficiency that you have with certain armor types in case you don't get them from your race or class option. Maybe a heavily, moderately, or lightly armored perk can fit you well depending on your needs. But there's also the Armor Master variants for the heavy, medium, and the shield, so you can gain some extra benefits from having certain types of armors equipped other than the ones that they come with by default. Now, there are a couple of honorable mentions I will also go over. Mage Slayer is one of them. When an enemy casts a spell within melee range of you, you have an advantage on any saving throw against it, and it allows you to use a reaction to immediately attack that caster, and enemies you hit also have a disadvantage on concentration saving throws. So you've got the spell resist, the extra attack, the way to punish them, easier time to break any concentration, and essentially just make it very hard for spellcasters to exist against you on the battlefield. There's also the Resilient perk. It gives you +1 to any ability, and it also makes you gain proficiency in that ability's saving throw. Say you play as a caster that's really squishy, you can just gain 1 constitution point, and you also have the extra proficiency with it, which is going to save you and help you a ton with the concentration saving throws in case enemies want to do the same towards you. Anyway, this is pretty much it with the video. Of course, there's plenty other options in there, so if you think there's anything else that I haven't covered and you think that there's a really good combo that nobody talks about or you discovered, totally let me know down below in the comments. Otherwise, if you want to know more about building up your character perfectly, then I checked this video. I went over a breakdown of some of the best races, or you can just look at some of the best beginner guides and videos that I have on the channel. Thanks so much for watching, and until the next one.